Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 50 of the Your Next Chapter podcast. Now, it is absolutely no secret, I don't think by now, to learn that I am an absolute book fiend. I've learned so much that has helped me in my own next chapter and actually getting there in the first place. And so whenever there's an opportunity for me to have a conversation with an author whose work has really had a significant impact on me, I get just a little bit excited, and that's what today is all about. Now, Russ Harris is the author of the international best-selling self-help book, The Happiness Trap, and he's a world-renowned trainer of what's called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. Now, Russ's background is in medicine, but as he was a GP, he became increasingly upset and disinterested in just writing out prescriptions, and he got really interested in the psychological aspects of health and well-being, and that led to a complete career change, a next chapter, shall we say. He moved out of medicine and into therapy and coaching. Now, when I first came across this concept of ACT, I was really blown away. It seemed to tick all the boxes for perspectives that I was already starting to form about the world, but hadn't really got all my ducks in a row, so to speak. But really what ACT is, it's all about maximizing your human potential for a rich and full and meaningful life. And how does it do that? Well, it's about teaching you these psychological skills to help you deal with those painful thoughts that can get you trapped and held back. It teaches you ways to deal with those effectively in such a way that even though they still exist, they have less influence over you and impact on you. It's really about making space for anxiety, for self-doubt, for diffusing your attachment to those feelings so that you can move around them. One of the central concepts is the idea of workability. How are things working out for you? If they're working fine, then however you're approaching life, then absolutely brilliant. Keep going in that way. But if things aren't quite up to scratch, if you're feeling as though there's something missing, or you're feeling overly anxious or worried about stuff, then looking at ACT as an idea and seeing if the aspects that Russ teaches and speaks about could be useful for you is really worthwhile. Now, the book that I found that got me started was The Confidence Gap. It literally jumped off the shelf for me at Byron Bay when I was on a conference, presenting at a conference. And when I started to read this and came and really started to understand ACT, I got very excited. Now, I've used the techniques myself. I've utilized them with my kids and certainly with my clients too. I'm actually going on one of Russ's workshops in the next month, and I can't wait to really dive in and learn more about this technique or this approach. But let's go into the interview, shall we? You'll learn so much from Russ, and there's plenty of links in the show notes as to where you can go and get a free chapter of his books through my website, and also links back to his website and other resources that he has. If you've not come across ACT and mindfulness before, this is going to just blow open a whole new door for you in your next chapter. I hope you really enjoy it. Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted business strategy. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the podcast especially for women in their 40s and beyond who know that business and personal development go hand in hand. Tune in each week for marketing, mindset, and personal growth strategies, along with inspiring stories from women around the world who are creating new businesses and lives that are personally fulfilling and financially rewarding. If you're looking to create a business and life you love, you're in great company. Let's find out what will unfold in your next chapter. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so delighted that you're here. Well, hello there and welcome back to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. Today, I am so delighted to be bringing Russ to you, who is going to be talking about ACT, acceptance, commitment, training, or therapy. Russ, thank you so much for spending your time here with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been a joy to read the books that you've written. I remember very precisely, I was up at Byron Bay at a conference and I walked into this amazing little bookshop and there was your book, The Happiness Trap, or The Happiness Gap, sorry. And
And when I saw that, it just jumped off the shelf because it was one of those concepts or those titles that really intrigued me. I didn't know much about, in fact, nothing about ACT as a concept until I picked up that book. And then it sort of, had me at hello, so to speak. So I'd love it if we could just get started with getting your working definition of ACT, what it's all about.
Oh, wow. Well, acceptance and commitment therapy is a model for the human condition, a model for helping humans rise up in the face of their challenges and build rich, full and meaningful lives. And it really has two strands to it. It's firstly, it's about clarifying your values, your heart's deepest desires for the sort of person you want to be, how you want to treat yourself and others, what you want to stand for in life, the qualities you want to bring to your behavior on an ongoing basis, and using those values as a compass to guide you, guide what you do on a moment-to-moment basis and guide you in the long term. And it's also about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a set of skills that enable you to handle difficult thoughts and feelings and live in the present moment and engage in what you're doing and let pain flow through you and appreciate what's happening and focus your attention. And so ACT teaches people how to mindfully act guided by their values to build rich and meaningful lives. And it's not sure that was short enough for you.
Oh, no, I love that. And I think that the part about it that connects me the most is that idea about being connected to your values and to lead a rich and fulfilling life, but not to be Pollyanna about it, to recognize that we are going to hit up against obstacles. There is pain in life, but this technique or approach or philosophy is a way of actually working through that and not fighting against it. That's how it felt when I was reading through it.
Yeah, so ACT, in the world of therapy, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. In the workplace, it's called acceptance and commitment training because you're not allowed to use the word therapy in workplaces. But what it really is a comprehensive scientific model. There's actually over 1,000 published studies doing research into ACT published in peer-reviewed psychology journals. So it's much more than a technique. It's a whole comprehensive model for behavior change with the primary aim of building a rich and meaningful life.
And I liked when I was reading through the book and the concept of identifying your values, because one of the little bits that I wrote down here was that the A in ACT is to accept your thoughts and feelings and to be present. And I guess that's the mindfulness part, to actually be present. But then the C part of choosing a valued direction. So making a choice for the behavior that you want that resonates and aligns with the way you want to live your life. And then to actually take that action. And those 3 points, when I pulled them together and I thought about applying them to really any situation that you bump up against in life, it made sense to me. But I remember reading about the double-edged sword of our mind and about how it can play against us sometimes. And I'd love it if you could expand on that concept, because our minds are certainly very useful, but they can certainly turn against us sometimes as well, can't they?
Oh, look, for sure. I mean, the thing is that the human mind has evolved predominantly as a problem-solving machine. And the human mind didn't evolve so that cavemen could live rich, full and meaningful lives. If we go back, scientists debate the figure, but most scientists agree that our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, appeared about 200,000 years ago in the fossil record. And at that point in evolutionary history, we had the same basic needs as every other higher animal on the planet: food, water, shelter, and sex. Those are what you need as a caveman or cave woman. The number one priority of the evolving human mind, the job it has to do better than any other job, is to stop you getting killed. Because, if you get killed, well, food and water and shelter and sex don't matter anymore. So this was the priority. This was the number one top job that the evolving human mind had to do. It had to stop you from getting killed. So how did it do that? Well, it looked around for danger. It anticipated danger. It predicted danger. So if there ever was a caveman or cave woman that was Mr. or Mrs. Optimistic, always positive thinking, always looking on the bright side, he or she didn't live very long. They got eaten. They got killed. They weren't your ancestors. You evolved from the one that was always on the lookout for danger. Is there a bear in the back of that cave? Is that shadow on the horizon a friend or a foe? Don't go into that dark forest by yourself. You might get eaten, And as a result of that, after 200,000 years of natural selection of human beings that are primed to look for, anticipate, predict, and prepare for danger, we've all got these minds that have evolved to think negatively. They conjure up fears. They kind of, one thing that's really essential to fit in with your group as a caveman or cavewoman is you've got to, if the group kick you out, you're not going to live very long, right?
In trouble.
Yeah, you're going to be, if you survive, you're not going to live very long by yourself. You have to fit in with the group. Otherwise, if they kick you out, the bears will have you for breakfast. If you survive breakfast, the wolves will have you for lunch. You won't make it to dinner time. So how does your mind ensure you fit in with the group? Well, it compares you to every other member of the group. Am I fitting in? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it well enough? Am I measuring up? Am I doing anything that might get me thrown out? Does this sound a bit like your mind?
It does a little bit, and it's funny that those two things that you're talking about, like I guess we're wired for caution, for fear, to react and to look for that all the time to protect ourselves. But then the other side as well is that we're always in comparison mode, and a lot of the women who are in my audience and we're looking at stepping into their next chapters, those are the two things that are going to trip you up every time. So
absolutely, and our minds have evolved to do this, and so no amount of positive thinking or optimistic thinking or positive affirmations is going to stop your mind from doing this stuff that it's evolved to do. So the bright side of those things is that there is a time and a place where it's really useful for us to predict danger and be aware of bad things that might happen and come up with constructive action plans to deal with that, where it's really useful to compare ourselves to other members of the group and kind of in terms of self-development and personal growth. But the dark side of that is all the self-judgment, the self-criticism, the comparing yourself down to others, the worrying, catastrophizing, predicting the worst, and then kind of avoiding stuff because it brings up anxious thoughts and feelings is a huge problem for people. And if we think about fear, anxiety, those are useful evolutionary responses. Our caveman ancestors experienced fear and anxiety to help them deal with real threats, to fight off a saber-toothed tiger or to run away from a woolly mammoth. But the problem is that in the modern world, our minds react to all sorts of difficult thoughts, feelings, situations, stuff inside our body and stuff outside our body as if it were a physical threat to our health. So, for example, we can have anxiety reactions to our own feelings, anxiety reactions to our own emotions, which is not really very helpful for us. But this is our evolutionary heritage.
It's quite reassuring in a way to hear this, because one of the things that I certainly hear, again, from the Women in the Next Chapter audience is that there's reassurance to know that you're not alone in having the thoughts of self-doubt, of anxiety, of fear. But let's take that to another level. It's even more reassuring to know that this is not just something that we do on a daily basis. It's actually wired into us. So that part is reassuring as well. I'm not unusual. I'm not weird. I'm just wired.
It's normal. It's normal. And, that can go a long way. We can get an enormous way just by recognizing that if I'm feeling fear, if I'm feeling anxiety, if I'm having self-doubt, that's normal, that's natural, and we can acknowledge it and say, thanks, mind. You're warning me that you're trying to save me from something.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah. But then I guess that the next step that we can take is if we can recognize and celebrate the fact that that means actually we're working well, we're working as we should. But now we can look at how that is not workable. And that's a concept I remember reading in the book about. A key concept with F-ACT is the thing you're doing or is the way you're responding workable? And if it's not, then that's when you can actually take some steps to find a different approach. And that sort of yardstick made sense to me. How's that working for you? It's not.
Yeah, well, if I can just add a bit to that. So the ACT concept of workability asks the question, Is what you are doing working to give you a rich, full, and meaningful life? Is it working to help you be the person you want to be and do the things you want to do? So very often what works in the short term to make us feel good, to help us escape a difficult situation, to help us push away some feelings of anxiety or some thoughts of self-doubt, often doesn't work in the long term to help us build a rich and meaningful life. So, for example, when we come to the issue of confidence, lots of people, anybody who is stepping out of their comfort zone into a challenging situation with an uncertain outcome is going to experience anxiety. They're going to have self-doubt. They're going to have fear. Now, if my behavior becomes dominated by, I have to avoid anxiety, I have to get rid of self-doubt, I have to avoid this fear, then I end up doing stuff that's unworkable. It may be drugs, it may be alcohol, it may be avoiding the challenges, it may be procrastinating on the task. So all of those things work in the short term to reduce my fear and reduce my anxiety and help me escape discomfort. But none of them work in the long term to give me a rich, full, and meaningful life. So workability asks that question, is it working in the long term to give you the life you want, to help you be the sort of person you really want to be deep in your heart?
That's extending that definition and explaining that more fully was really valuable. Thank you. And it also makes me think all the time I spent this morning productively procrastinating. It was not that workable.
Well, I mean, we want to be human with this. We're all, every time I do these interviews, my mind starts saying to me, oh, Russ, you're such a hypocrite. You're such a fraud. You're such a fake. So if they can see you, I often forget everything that I write in my books and teach in my workshops. But the thing is, I get better at remembering. I get better at catching myself when I've gone off track. I've got better at kind of staying on track for longer periods. But we're all fallible human beings. No one's perfect.
Oh, absolutely. And that concept there is the perfectionism is something that I've seen, trap myself, trap my daughter, trap so many different people when we think we've got to get it absolutely right, or berating ourselves if we do fall off the wagon, so to speak, and don't always practice, our intentions perfectly. So we've got to have a big dose of self-compassion there as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that links right back to the kind of caveman mind. So as a caveman or woman, I'll say cave person from now on. As a cave person, there was a huge advantage if your mind said to you, keep practicing, do this over and over again to get better at it. The cave person that did that got better and was able to get better results than the other members of the clan or the tribe or the group. But the problem is, after 200,000 years of that, now we get perfectionism. Now it goes beyond that to, you've got to do it perfectly and you've got to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. And often the flip side of that is, if you can't do it perfectly, don't even do it at all.
Don't even try.
So again, this is our caveman mind trying to help. But I often describe it as like an overly helpful friend. One of those overly helpful friends that's trying so hard to help, they often end up sabotaging.
I like to think of it like that. So I guess what we're looking at, and just from some of the notes that I made before, is what we're after is psychological flexibility. That ability to be able to respond in different ways to the situations that present themselves, and not to be stuck in a habitual way of responding.
Yeah, psychological flexibility is a big jargon term. There's lots of jargon terms in acting. We want to kind of make it simple. It boils down to this: your capacity to be present, to open up and do what matters. Your ability to be in the present moment, right here, right now, instead of getting swept up into your thoughts about the future or your thoughts about the past, or getting distracted. To be present with your attention focused on what's happening right here, right now in this moment. To open up, in other words, to open up and make room for all the thoughts and feelings that are showing up in this moment, which might be some very painful emotions, thoughts and feelings, or might be some very pleasant ones. It varies. Your thoughts and feelings vary like the weather. They're changing all the time. So can I be present? Can I open up and make room for my thoughts and feelings? And can I do what matters? In other words, act in line with my values, behaving like the sort of person I really want to be deep in my heart. And the greater your ability to be present, open up and do what matters, the greater your quality of life, the greater your health and well-being, the greater the quality of your relationships, higher levels of this ability, this psychological flexibility, protect from depression, anxiety, and help recovery from those kinds of disorders.
Mm. It makes me think of, and I use this as an example when I was interviewing another person on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the situation that I brought up as the example is our son started university just a couple of weeks ago, and we took him interstate down to Canberra to start at ANU. And the emotions that were absolutely racing through me, there was a lot of fear because Cameron had been very unwell last year, and I wasn't sure if he's going to be ready for this. There was sadness because, the chicken was flying the coop, so to speak. There was excitement on behalf of him to actually be stepping into this new part of life. And I was just so awash with all of these feelings. And it was interesting to watch myself have the thoughts and to accept what was going on. I couldn't change the situation. This was actually happening, whether I liked it or not, or did. Yeah. And then to stay in that awareness state and, as you say, connect back to the values. What really matters? Well, I looked upon it from the perspective of it had been my job as a parent to get my son to this point and to get in the car and drive away, because that's what it took. That's the action that was needed on that particular day.
For sure, and here's the thing, if we live our values, it enables us to live rich, full and meaningful lives, and it comes with lots of pain. The things that make life rich, full and meaningful don't just give rise to pleasant feelings. If I were to ask any parent out there, I've probably asked about 25,000 parents this question now in all the various workshops I've run around the world. I kind of say, hands up in the audience, who here are parents? And it's usually about 75% of the audience. And I say, okay, so having children gives you a huge amount of meaning and purpose in your life, gives you some of the most wonderful feelings you'll ever know, feelings of love and joy you didn't know were possible. And what other feelings does it give you? And, there's this cacophony, rage, frustration, anxiety, sadness, guilt, shame, embarrassment, fatigue, exhaustion, and
you have spoken to a lot of parents.
This is the thing, but of course, it's not just parenting, it's any important area of life. I invite your listeners to just think of any important relationship with someone that they really care about, someone they spend a lot of time with. Does anyone have a relationship like that just gives rise to pleasant feelings all the time? Or something as fundamental as just looking after your physical health brings up all sorts of discomfort. Building a career, building a network of friends, all of these things come with painful feelings.
So what's the difference, Russ, do you see? Because what you're talking about there is absolutely true. And my mind is, racing as you're giving all of these examples. So what is the difference between understanding, a philosophy or an approach like this and actually being able to regularly utilize it? Is it just a practice thing once you've got the awareness of what are the steps involved in an approach like this? What stops us from actually improving our situations?
That's a great question. There are several things. One of them is the illusion that reading about it, thinking about it, or listening to podcasts about it is enough to be able to do it. These skills, these ability to clarify your values and translate them into goals and actions, and practice mindfulness and unhook from difficult thoughts and make room for difficult feelings without being swept away by them. These are skills that actually need to be practiced. It's like going to the gym and lifting weights. You can watch a documentary about lifting weights and know what to do, but unless you actually go to the gym and lift weights, your muscles won't get any stronger. You won't be able to lift any heavier weights. So that's probably the main thing that stops people. They read a book or they hear about an idea or they read an article in a women's magazine and they think, oh yeah, I know that now.
Eureka moment.
Hey, got to practice the skills. I think the other thing that stops people back is that most of us are reluctant to do things that are uncomfortable. We naturally avoid discomfort, and learning new skills is uncomfortable. Luckily, the ACT model comes with an inbuilt antidote. It teaches you how to make room for discomfort, how to accept discomfort in the service of doing what's important. There's no doubt about it that probably the single biggest factor in building a rich and meaningful life is your capacity to accept uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. The more avoidant you are of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, the more you go through life trying to avoid difficult thoughts and feelings and the situations and challenges that bring them, the greater your risk is of developing a whole range of different psychological disorders, from depression and anxiety to addiction and so on.
Absolutely. And not to mention that your life stays small. It stays small if you're not willing to embrace the discomfort that often leads to growth, without being cliched.
No, sure, absolutely. And the thing is, people often know this intellectually, but you have to learn the skills. How do I actually learn the skill when I'm flooded with anxiety of actually allowing it to be there without getting into a struggle with it or without getting crushed by it?
This is the piece that really fascinates me, the whole approach to like dealing with your feelings and moving through them. I mean, I've made no secret in my own, to my own audience, is one of the big parts of my life is moving through addiction. I'm 10 years in recovery, and I used to numb the feelings all the time. That was my way of dealing with discomfort, and that's no longer an option. So there has been a lot of painful growth over the last 10 years, that's for sure. But the piece that comes up again and again, that, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the conversation, is this lack of confidence, or this lack of belief that I can do it. Whatever that is, that value-driven life, or that value-fulfilling life, that rich and fulfilling experience that you were talking about with the definition of ACT.
Yes.
And you had a couple of different definitions as to what confidence was. And I'll just read them out here: a feeling of certainty or assurance, or an act of trust or reliance. And I loved the two differences between them, and it felt like the second one was the one that I'd love to see us lean into a little bit more, just taking the action and trusting. If it's in alignment with your values, then it's moving you in the right direction.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that's an extract from my book, The Confidence Gap. So in The Confidence Gap, I talk about the problems that are created by these two different definitions of confidence. So most people, when they're talking about confidence, mean that first definition, a feeling of certainty or assurity, and total assurance, and complete absence of self-doubt and anxiety. And if that's your idea of confidence, you are going to struggle with reality.
Yeah.
The other definition is the much older definition of confidence. So the word confidence originally came from the Latin confides, meaning with faith or with trust. So originally it meant an act of faith or an act of trust that you would do even if you felt absolutely terrified, even if you were racked with self-doubt, even if you had no belief that it was going to kind of work out. You'd still do it as an act of faith or an act of trusting in yourself or an act of relying on yourself. Or others. And so in the ACT approach, we go with this second definition of confidence. Have faith in yourself, trust in yourself, make room for all the anxiety and self-doubt that is virtually guaranteed to show up when you first start stepping out of your comfort zone, trying new things. When you've done something over and over and over and over and over again so that you can do it with competence, then you might find some of the self-doubt and anxiety starts reducing. But until you reach the point of competence, then there would be something actually abnormal if you didn't have fear, anxiety, and self-doubt. But then even from competence to, I think I'm pretty competent at giving podcasts, and I would say that I am quite confident about doing interviews. But that still doesn't mean that I have no self-doubt and no anxiety. Confidence doesn't mean an absence of fear. It doesn't mean fearlessness. It doesn't mean no self-doubt. It just means trusting in yourself to do what's important. And you look in the dictionary, you'll find both of these definitions. The one I'm giving you is usually not in the first place, though, because it's an older definition. And so when people in everyday life say, I would do it, but I don't have the confidence, what they're really saying is, I would do it, but I'm waiting until all my fear and anxiety and thoughts of self-doubt and fear of failure has disappeared. And when that's gone, then I'll start doing it.
It's like the confidence paradox, isn't it? You get trapped in that. I will when I can, but I can't, so I won't.
Yeah. So, in the book, I talk about the golden rule. The actions of confidence come first. The feelings of confidence come later. Maybe if you're lucky, but not necessarily. So the actions of confidence, doing what matters, an act of faith or an act of trust in yourself, and making room for all the thoughts and feelings that go with it. That's the pathway to building the sort of life that you want.
Absolutely. When you've got that values alignment again, like what you were saying before. And yeah, I agree. This is, I'm going to think this is the 46th or 7th podcast interview that I've done. And I would certainly say by now I'm fairly competent, but I still get that fear before I click record and dial the person. It absolutely happens with me as well. So, but you've got to act. You've just got to, as you say, no pun intended, you've just got to act.
Yeah, well, I mean, Pete, as I'm talking to you right now, I actually have a thin layer of sweat on my hands. I have I can feel my heart racing. I can feel some tightness in my jaw, but I'm not struggling with that. I know that's that's a natural anxiety that comes with any type of performance. There is a kind of performance element to this. You're asking me these questions. I should have taken up your offer to prepare, but I didn't. And some of them are throwing me, and some of them is like, oh, how can I get that across? So there's a challenge to it. And so I accept that anxiety. So, we see this with stage performance. Most stage performers, musicians and actors, before they go out on stage, they'll have high levels of anxiety, but they usually accept that, and they'll usually refer to that as being revved or pumped or an adrenaline rush. They'll usually use a positive term for it. But occasionally a performer starts to go, oh no, these feelings are terrible. I don't like these feelings of anxiety. I don't like these thoughts about failure. I've got to get rid of them. I'm not going to go out on stage until these have gone. And that's what we call stage fright. So this capacity, the way we relate to our perfectly natural feelings of anxiety and our perfectly natural thoughts of self-doubt has a huge impact. If we can relate to them in this more mindful way, accepting them, allowing them to flow through us, then it's not a problem. But if we get hooked by them, get into a struggle with them, start fighting them, or let them kind of push us around, then it does create problems.
I guess that's very much what you were saying before when you said we need to make room for the anxiety and the self-doubt, that it's an inevitable part, but we only have to trip over it if we try and fight against it. So there was, and if I may just read these to you, I found these 6 cores of ACT. And I'd love to dig down onto each of them just briefly as we can, especially the thinking tools, diffusion and other things, which I thought were really, really helpful. So the cores, and I'll put this on the podcast page as well so everyone can read through them. But number 1 was to contact the present moment, to be here now, being the mindfulness piece, I guess. And number 2 was diffusion, watching your thinking. And number 3 was that acceptance you've referred to, opening up to what's actually happening. Number 4 was, I love this one, I got really fascinated, the self as context, being pure awareness, that difference between thinking and observing our thoughts and being able to dance between the two. And number 5 was our values, knowing what matters. And then number 6 was that committed action, doing what it takes. And those steps made pure sense to me, but I'd love if we could just talk briefly about each of those points so everyone listening can move through them as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure. Right. So can I just briefly talk about the word mindfulness?
Please, yes.
Because it's a word that is it's being wildly misused. The more popular it gets as a concept, the more misunderstandings and misuses of it. So firstly, mindfulness refers to a whole set of psychological skills. It's not just one thing. And none of these skills are relaxation techniques. None of these skills are ways to feel good or feel positive. Mindfulness is not a way to feel good, to think positively, to relax, to escape unwanted thoughts and feelings. What all mindfulness skills have in common is they all involve paying attention in a particular way. Paying attention to what's happening right here, right now, with an attitude of openness and curiosity. even if what's happening is very unpleasant and unwanted.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So it's got when you practice mindfulness in a nice, safe, non-challenging environment, you may well feel relaxed and feel good. But when you practice mindfulness in a really challenging, stressful environment, you will feel what people feel in really challenging, stressful environments. You know, if you practice mindfulness in a funeral where the person that you love has just died, you're going to feel enormous sadness while you're being mindful. You know, if you're being mindful while you're in a war zone, you're going to feel high levels of fight or flight response, fear and anxiety while you're being mindful. So it's really a way of paying attention with openness and curiosity. And it refers to a whole set of different skills. And in the ACT model, we talk about 4 main sets of mindfulness skills, which are 4 of those 6 core things. So one mindfulness skill is contacting the present moment, noticing what's happening right here, right now, with this attitude of openness and curiosity. So it might be noticing the world outside me, what I can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell, or the world inside me of thoughts and feelings. It might involve narrowing my attention to focus on a complex task, or it might be broadening my attention to take in all the sights and sounds when I'm walking through the countryside. So there's this kind of flexibility of attention. Another mindfulness skill in the ACT model is called diffusion. It's the ability to step back and notice your thoughts, or watch your thoughts, or observe your thoughts without getting caught up in your thoughts, to kind of notice what your mind is telling you, to let your mind shatter away like a radio playing in the background. Acceptance is a term that's wildly misunderstood. Acceptance doesn't mean that you like it, want it, or approve of it. It just means that you open up and make room for and allow the thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories that are showing up for you in this moment. It means making room for your inner world, for all your thoughts and feelings. It doesn't mean passively accepting the situation that you're in. It means making room for allowing all the thoughts and feelings that are showing up for you in that situation. And when you do this, then they're able to flow through you in their own good time. You don't get swept away by them or pushed around by them or struggle with them. So it's very empowering that way. The fourth kind of mindfulness process there is really talking about the observing self. When we use this word mind in everyday language, we talk about our minds, but there's kind of 2 parts to the mind, if you like. There's this thinking self, the part of us that's thinking all the time, conjuring up words and pictures and stories, imagining, remembering, fantasizing, planning, problem solving, trying to think of smart things to say during the podcast and so forth. That's your thinking self. But there's this other part of the mind that doesn't think. We can call it the observing self. This is it's often called the silent self because it doesn't speak, it doesn't think, it just silently observes and notices what's happening in our inner world and our outer world. And this kind of part of the mind is actually the foundation for all the other mindfulness skills, this observing self. So there's your kind of 4 mindfulness skills in the ACT model, but they're all in the service of helping people to live their values, you know, your heart's deepest desires, how you want to behave, what you want to do in life, and to make the most out of that. And values are like a compass, but a compass doesn't give you a journey. A compass just guides you. So we have to translate the values into action. So this is the kind of goal setting, skills training, action planning stuff where you translate your values into real life actions. Committed action is the aim for that in the ACT approach. And these are like 6 facets of a diamond, and the diamond itself is psychological flexibility.
Oh, I love how it all comes together there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, it's like, and I actually found that diagram in one of the pieces of research online, so I might share that on the podcast page as well, because it shows how all the pieces flow into each other and continue to work around in that diamond. It makes
or if you want to remember it in a simple way, you can just think, be present, open up, do what matters.
If only it were that simple.
Well, it's simple to say. It's simple to say. It's like if we come back to the gym analogy. Like, all you need to do is go and lift the weights regularly and increase them slowly, bit by bit over, and of course that won't give you big muscles,
It took me a while to discover that just joining the gym didn't actually count. I actually had to turn up. Damn, spoiled everything for me. But that concept of translating your values or translating that guidance into goals that serve you. That's a really important piece, I think. We can talk a lot about what our values are and what's important to us, and that's certainly something that is bandied around a lot in the personal development and the entrepreneurial world, and living by your values and creating your business around your values, but then actually translating those into action. So what does that value look like in action, I think is a really important part. How do you think we could do that step? I know it's a single step in all of the pieces, but if someone was sitting down perhaps to design a business, let's say, and they had values of, of commitment and honesty, and trying to think of a couple of others off the top of my head, but is there a particular process or guidance for us to take those values and turn them into goals that we pursue? Or is this the bigger picture that we can't really pull that apart just now?
No, for sure. I mean, it begins by asking, it can begin in various different ways. Probably the easiest way is to think, what's the smallest, simplest, easiest little step I can take right now that's aligned with that value? Maybe if we go with honesty, maybe I can just be honest with myself about how challenging it is to do this. Maybe I can be honest with one of the other people involved in setting up this business about some of the difficulties here. Maybe I can be honest in the blurb that I'm writing on the website about what the business offers. So what's the smallest, simplest little step that I can do to live this value? And then start progressively making the goals longer and longer. What are steps that I can take to live this value over the next week, over the next month, over the next year? On the other hand, we can also tease values out of goals. We can start with a long-term goal that we've set and ask, well, what are the values underlying this? For example, suppose my goal is to build give me an example. I've gone blank.
No, that's okay. I'm thinking of like a lot of women who are in their next chapters. They're wanting to create a business that is fulfilling.
Yeah,
that's a personal thing. It needs to feel fulfilling. It needs to make a contribution.
Okay, so they've identified that one of their values then is contribution. I'll come back to this in a minute because I just want to talk about fulfilling. Fulfillment is something that happens. Actually, virtually anything can be fulfilling if we engage in it mindfully and we bring our values into play with whatever it is that we're doing. Then fulfillment is possible. So there's kind of two different types of fulfillment. There's the fulfillment that comes from achieving your goals, and there's the fulfillment that comes from living your values. And your values can be lived in any moment of any time, any place. If my value is honesty or kindness or loving or fairness, I can live that value right now. Even if my goals for building my career and building my business are a long way off, even if I never achieve those goals, I can still live those values on a day-to-day basis and a moment-to-moment basis and find fulfillment in that. So, in the confidence gap, I encourage people to redefine success. Success is usually defined in terms of achieving your goals. And that's a double-edged sword, because obviously when you do achieve those goals, yay, what a great feeling. But there's often long periods of time where you're not achieving those goals. And there's all sorts of goals that you never will achieve or you'll fail at. But if you redefine success as living your values, then there really is such a thing as instant success. I can live my values of being loving and kind and caring right now, even if I never achieve the goal of building a hospice for terminal care.
Oh, that is such an important subject. I really want to just highlight this one again, because especially in the entrepreneurial world, there is so much comparison that goes on. You get what I call the jackpot example. So there's so many people that are in the online world in particular, and we see the occasional jackpot, like, oh my goodness, they've created this, multi-million-dollar business, et cetera, and we sit there, and I'm using the term we because I've had this conversation many times, of I can never be like that, and so therefore I'm not a success. So that redefining success is so important. But this concept that you've just introduced of you can be an instant success by living your values in everything that you do is just such a That's such a valuable, again, no pun intended, I can't help it, full of cliches today. That's such a great philosophy to have.
Well, if we can just give me an example of what's, one of your listeners, what would be a typical business that they would be wanting to build in order to contribute?
Oh, we have a lot of people who are life coaches who have come through their own sort of not great experience and come out the other end and want to share the wisdom that they have with others. I say next chapter businesses are often built on skinned knees, like, where the potholes are, so you help people avoid them. So one good example,
so
a divorce coach. A divorce coach is a great one.
So let's say my goal is to become a divorce coach. So then I want to ask, what are the values that I want to live as a divorce coach? As a divorce coach, I can be kind, compassionate, loving, respectful, curious, open-minded, and so forth. So I want to define what kind of divorce coach do I be? If we interviewed a few of your coachees on live television and we said, what were her greatest qualities? What was she like to be around? What kind of answers would you want them to give? And having identified what those values are, then you don't actually have to wait until the day that you have a thriving divorce coaching practice to start living those values. If you can look for little ways to live those values right now in your relationship with yourself. Can you be kind and curious to yourself, or your relationship with other people that share your house or share your street? Many of those values I just mentioned, you can live in a relationship with a cat or a dog or a pot plant. So there's the values are basically desired qualities of behavior. They're not what I want to achieve or have or own or complete. Those things are called goals. Values are just desired qualities of behavior, the qualities I want to bring to my actions right now in this moment and on an ongoing basis.
And there's where you get that feeling of instant success. That's a definition that I'm going to bandy around a bit, methinks, because I love that one. Because, just in the moment, you can feel great about what it is that you're doing. You don't have to wait until you climb that mountain or reach that pinnacle or ticked off that goal. Every day, you can be feeling in alignment and quite fulfilled.
And you can feel great, and you can also feel terrible.
Oh, yeah.
It's like I just want to keep hammering that home. Living your values. Even if you redefine that, I'm successfully living my values, what you're doing in that moment may be incredibly painful. Like the example you gave of saying goodbye to your son. Often living our values brings up enormous pain. It's important, and that's the dark side. The bright side is that often it doesn't. Living your values can also just give rise to lovely, wonderful, feelings of love and joy. So, the ACT model was actually created in the USA by Professor Stephen Hayes. And one of his sayings that I really love is, he says, there's as much life in a moment of pain as in a moment of joy. And I love that. Where in this moment, there is one moment of life. This moment may be full of pain or full of joy or a mixture of both, but it's one moment of life. And you want to live that moment of life, regardless of whether it's full of pain or joy or both.
Absolutely. And I love that quote as well. And I follow on its heels with this too will pass. That's something that was given to me a while ago, and it's true. This moment, no matter how fabulous it is or how frigging horrible it is, this too will pass. If we can, as you've suggested, bring that mindful presence to it and open to it. The definition of acceptance that you were giving us before was a really important one, because it's not just a case of like, oh, bugger it, like, it is what it is. It's going a little bit deeper than that. It feels like.
It's a lot deeper than that. I'm going to have to dash soon.
No, that's okay.
But I'd like to finish up by talking about, if it's okay. So the World Health Organization contacted me last year to create an ACT protocol to be used in refugee camps and war zones in third world countries around the world. And the starting point was we were going to roll this program out in these huge refugee camps, and often people are stuck in these camps for, they may be 10, 20, 30 years in these kind of war-torn countries like Uganda and Syria and so forth. And there may be, some of these camps are enormous. They've got 300,000, 400,000 people in them. And so at the pillar at the center of ACT is something that I like to call the resilience formula, which is a lot like the serenity prayer. Basically says that, you know, for any problematic situation, there are three options. Option one is you can leave. Option two is you can stay, change what can be changed, accept what can't be changed, and live by your values. Option three is you can stay, give up, and do stuff that makes it worse. And we put that as our kind of central pillar of the protocol that we created for these refugee camps. So we wanted to start by putting leave the situation as an option in, just to acknowledge to those folks it's not actually an option for them. If you're in a refugee camp or if you're in prison, you can't leave the situation. So we just wanted to acknowledge that that wasn't an option for them. But of course, many of your listeners, that will be an option. If you're in a crappy marriage, crappy job, crappy neighborhood, you often can leave the situation. But if you can't leave the situation, or if for some reason you won't leave the situation, then you're down to two options. So the second option is, as I said, a lot like the serenity prayer. Stay in the situation, change what can be changed, taking control of your arms and your legs and your mouth to take action, to do whatever you possibly can to change the situation. Accept what can't be changed. If you're in a really difficult, challenging situation, like stuck in a refugee camp, you're going to have lots of painful thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories. Can you accept that stuff? Because you're not going to be feeling happy and positive. And do what matters, kind of let your values guide you. So stay, change what can be changed, accept what can't be changed, and live by your values. So you're stuck in a refugee camp. You can hide in your tent all day and ignore the people around you, or you can come out of your tent and interact with the people around you. When you interact with the people around you, you can be hostile, aggressive, surly, or you can be friendly, warm, companionable. So even in a refugee camp, there are choices available to you. You may have none of the bare essentials that you want, but you can still choose to live your values within that situation. And then option three, of course, is to stay, give up, and do stuff that makes it worse, which we all know very well. We've all done that many times in our lives. We stay in the situation, we lose touch with our values, and we turn to drugs or alcohol or double-coated chocolate Tim Tams or picking fights or hiding from the world. And that stuff comes naturally to us all. But of course, there's no vitality or fulfillment in that stuff.
So that resilience formula is certainly something that we can adopt and adapt for whatever situation we're in, whether you're building a business, whether you're just stepping into a new type of adventure or a different way of approaching your life, whether it be having, getting out of the relationship, everything. You can use that sort of protocol to follow. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, Russ, this has been a wonderful conversation. I have a feeling that we could have talked for about 4 or 5 hours, but duty calls, there are things we need to do. So now I just ask, if our listeners want to find out more about this approach, I know I got the two books mixed up. We've got the Confidence Gap and the Happiness Trap. So I put links on the page, but where can we find you online?
Well, look, if listeners are interested in the personal development side, they probably want to go to thehappinesstrap.com.
Okay, thehappinesstrap.com. I'll make sure I pop that link on there.
Thehappinesstrap.com.
Yeah, I got that one. And I'll put the links for the books as well.
And if that's kind of more for, just the general public, just applying ACT to everyday life. If you go to that site, you'll see we're actually just about to launch an online program in that. If confidence is the more specific issue, and particularly if it's business related, then you may want The Confidence Gap, might be the better book or the better option. But if in terms of doing like an online personal course, the thehappinesstrap.com I'm just waffling now, aren't I? There we go.
No, you're letting us know the ones that are most important. I'll make sure I put the links there because my listeners are on both sides. They're starting businesses, but they're also dealing with life. So the two of them are very entwined. So I'll make sure both links go up there.
Well, the Confidence Gap doesn't have a specific website link, but what I do have that people might be interested in is a website called psyflex.com, which is psyflex, psyflex.com.au, psyflex.com.au, which is all about taking psychological flexibility into the workplace for well-being and resilience.
That was a soundbite if I've ever heard one. That was wonderful. And again, thank you so much for fitting us into your schedule. There's so much here that we talked about today that is distinctly pertinent and relevant to the listeners right now. So I'm a huge fan of your books, and I'm looking forward to coming to the training program up in Newcastle. I think it's in May. It's booked into my diary, so I look forward to meeting you there.
Thanks a lot. See you then.
You're most welcome. Talk soon.
Cheers. Bye.
And thank you to my listeners for listening to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. There was so much in this particular conversation that is so relevant for you to go and put into conscious action right away. So thanks again. I look forward to hearing how this episode makes a change in your life. Take care. This is Angela Rasmus. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Pop over to angelarasmus.com to subscribe to the show and leave a review. And whilst you're there, you can also enjoy valuable free resources, including show notes and downloads, along with the Next Chapter community, where you can connect with other wholehearted women on the same journey as you. We'd love to welcome and support you as your next chapter unfolds. See you next time.